Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, Luka Garza gets a big promotion as the Wolves fill their final roster spot, plus more details from the ownership saga. The Wolves are now second in net rating in the league, and an interesting Wolves-Suns matchup. We haven't seen Phoenix in almost 4 months. We'll talk about all that on the show today. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. And happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend and happy Wolves game day. The Timberwolves take on the Phoenix Suns tonight for the first time since November 15th, which, of course, was the first, I think it was actually the first loss of the season for the Wolves. Certainly the first significant loss. It was the first loss, wasn't it? No, it wasn't the first loss. It was the first blowout loss that the Wolves had this year, way back in November. So I want to dig back into what happened then. Obviously, both these teams looked very different, but also what the Suns have been up to lately. And why Phoenix, I mean, I guess no Karl-Anthony Towns, but Phoenix is favored in this game at FanDuel by a few points. So lots to get to here today because I want to talk about some other stuff first related to the roster, ownership, etc. A big thank you off the top, though, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Also, a reminder with the game tonight that if you can't watch the game live, you can listen on SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just search Minnesota Timberwolves. You'll get the hometown broadcast with our buddy Alan Horton calling the game. Again, search Minnesota Timberwolves on the SXM app to get Wolves Suns. Also, after the game, you can listen to the live postcast of the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel. Every single game, we go live following the game, usually hosted by our guy Luke Inman with Jack Borman from Canis Hoopus, editor-in-chief over there. And then, of course, the audio from that, if you can't catch that live after the game, will be posted to this very audio feed, the Locked On Wolves audio feed. So we're covering the Wolves in every which way, including on a Friday night. You'll get the postcast from Wolves Suns following the game. All right. Let's talk first about Luka Garza. It's a big moment for Luka Garza, who, of course, has been with the Wolves now. This is year 2 with Minnesota. And, it's not the backstory as to why he was promoted. If you missed the show, it was maybe 2 weeks ago. I talked a little bit about, it was actually probably right around when they gave TJ Warren the deal for the rest of the year. So maybe 10 days ago or so. And I explained at the time that the Wolves had 2 roster spots open. Technically 1 plus the 10-day slot that TJ Warren was signed to twice. Because initially that was, remember, Justin Jackson was on the team for 2 10 days. They then filled that slot with TJ Warren because rules stipulate you can only have 13 guys on your roster for X number of days. I think it's like 4 weeks over the course of the season and no more than 2 weeks consecutively. So eventually they then signed TJ Warren, got them to 14 players, but they still had an open roster spot available. And while you can operate with 14 for as much as you want during the season, you have to have it full. I think I'm actually off by, yeah, that's right. You have to actually have it full by the end of the regular season. So by the last day of the regular season, the Wolves would have been compelled to sign somebody to a futures, to a standard NBA contract, right? So sometimes teams will do that, essentially like a futures contract in the NFL. They'll sign somebody, especially a team that's not in the playoffs. They'll sign someone who they want to have on the roster for the summer or whatever. And that's just kind of how, some of these teams operate with the end of the roster. What the Wolves decided to do is actually what I predicted they would do, which was convert Luka Garza to a standard contract. There was no rush to do it, which is why they hadn't done it until now. And surely with the uncertainty with the Karl-Anthony Towns injury and also how well Luka played when pressed into actual rotation duty, a week and a half ago or so, the Wolves were like, hey, let's reward him now. Why wait till the last day of the season? And they converted Luka Garza to a standard NBA contract, which means 2 things. 1, there are no more open roster spots and they don't have to sign anyone else. And 2, actually means 3 things. 2, Garza is now eligible for the postseason to give them some additional depth. Again, And I said this a couple weeks ago, if Luka Garza is playing postseason minutes, something went terribly wrong. And in this case, it simply means that, God forbid somebody gets hurt, but that would be how he gets in the game, or like really severe foul trouble against an opponent where you need a big lineup. Garza could give you some palatable rotation minutes. And then the third thing that means is the Wolves will finish the year with an open two-way slot. Of course, injured rookie Jalen Clark has one of them, and Daishen Nix has the other. Those guys are not eligible to play in the playoffs, but Garza now is because he's on a standard contract. So in terms of on the court, what he's provided, he hasn't had to play nearly as much. I shouldn't say that. It's close. He's played 21 games this year. He played in 28 games last year. The Wolves have been healthier until this most recent Karl-Anthony Towns injury. And Garza continues to do Garza stuff, right? When he's available or when he's pressed into duty, he plays well. He dominated garbage time the other day. He's been good in the G League once again. What he's going to be asked to do is rebound, be a body on defense, and then knock down shots when he gets the opportunity, knock down open shots when he gets the opportunity. He hasn't shot it as well. And again, very limited. He shot 39 attempts last year from outside the arc for the season, was 36%. This year he's 9 of 30, which is 30%. It's not like he's being given a ton of opportunity to play, period. But when pressed into duty, it's been roughly the same thing, right? That's not that crazy of a variance for somebody who isn't playing very much. What he's done in the G League, he of course was in the G League All-Star game again this year. He's only played actually, you know what? He just played in the Showcase Cup earlier this year in the G League. He's barely played in the G League this season. And in 3 games of the G League, he averaged 37 points and 12 rebounds per game. Remember last year in the G League, he played 6 regular season games, averaged 32 and 12, and in 9 Showcase Cup games, he averaged 30 and 9. And he shot the 3 basically the same there. Although last year in his stretch, he maybe shot a little bit better, but he's kind of hovered around 36% from 3 for the most part in the G League. He got hot for a stretch last year as well. But like if he could be around league average and provide you some rebounding, I mean, he's not a bad, I guess right now he's a 3rd center. When Cat comes back, he's your 4th center, right? So I get it. I get why they did it. It makes sense. Anybody you were going to sign to that last contract, you're hoping they're not going to have to help you in the playoffs anyway. You could say the same thing about there's no room in the rotation. TJ Warren's out of the rotation right now. He's the 10th guy. When Cat comes back, likely it's McLaughlin that's out of the rotation, although with the way he's playing now, who knows, right? So it's not like they were going to do anything crazy with it. This makes sense to me. It also makes sense to send a message to players who could fill 2-way slots for them in the future that, hey, if you do your job, you work hard, and there's injuries and it makes sense, we're going to promote you. And that's the other piece of it. Like Tim Conley's alluded to this in the past, it's important that the Wolves reward players that play hard and earn an opportunity. They did that actually years ago with Naz Reid's a good example. He had such a good summer league. He went from a 2-way contract to a standard NBA contract as an undrafted guy. And ultimately, Jordan McLaughlin was rewarded too and has been on a standard NBA contract now as an undrafted guy. So kudos to the Wolves for doing it. Congrats to Luka for finding his way to a standard NBA deal. And now the Wolves have no more roster spots. The roster's set for the playoffs. All right. A little bit of ownership news that came out from a Brian Windhorst article at ESPN. I want to cruise through that real quick, and then we'll talk a little bit about where the Wolves are right now, the ESPN power rankings, but also more importantly, in the Western Conference standings, a big development that happened on Thursday night related to one of the other top 3 teams in the West, plus the Wolves net rating and where they now stand after, frankly, playing very well since Karl-Anthony Towns got hurt. And then I want to preview Wolves Suns, which we haven't talked about in a long time. The Wolves have not seen the Suns since before Thanksgiving. So a lot to get to yet today. We'll get to all of it here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is sponsored by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood is the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on a 3% match either. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Do you watch Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? If so, no doubt you have to turn down the volume with all the shouting. So instead, make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories and the best stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, so ownership saga broke like a week ago, and there was a lot of local reporting on it, to support the national report from Shams. John Krasinski got a bit of an exclusive quote. Darren Wolfson always gets some quotes for Darren from Score North and KSTP Channel 5, gets some access to Glenn Taylor. And, this thing, we're not going to hear anything else concrete until the summer, almost certainly, and that's how it should be, given where the team is. Like, hey, let's not distract. And I think that Glenn Taylor, Mark Lowry, and Alex Rodriguez can mostly agree on that, hopefully, at this point. Obviously, it sounds like there's tension between all three of them. There was some additional reporting last week that Lowry and Rodriguez themselves had some contentiousness between them related to how much money A-Rod's actually put up. Now, of course, they did a bunch of media appearances late last week together, so like clearly they're going to present a united front. But there was some reporting, I think it was Sportico maybe, there some various reports out there that perhaps Lowry's side was a bit frustrated with Rodriguez's side, although I think we knew all along that was kind of the deal, right? That Rodriguez still had less cash than Lowry. Lowry, is, I mean, in Brian Windhorst's article, he says Lowry's not a billionaire, but I guess, like, we've seen kind of conflicted reports on that. I feel like his net worth at one point was around $1 billion. So it's close, but like Lowry has more money than Rodriguez, but neither one of them has as much money as Glenn Taylor, right? And that's kind of the thing here. So the Windhorst article largely just breaks down the whole thing, which we've done before on the show and likely you're somewhat familiar with. But of course, the short version is Lowry and Rodriguez did not apparently make the last 40% payment by the deadline in late March, like the 27th or 28th. And so Glenn Taylor executed a clause to retain the team. And of course, Lowry and Rodriguez say that they did everything they were supposed to do. According to Windhorst, the part that's new is he just goes into detail about it being a 50-page document, the sales agreement which makes sense, right? It's a complicated thing. This weird, like, quote unquote, installment plan is a very weird way to buy a professional sports team. So it's a 50-page document. And according to Windhorst, there were, quote, numerous protections for Taylor, and they believe he's on firm legal ground because of this. And Lowry and Rodriguez are still saying that they didn't violate the agreement, of course. Glenn Taylor wins legal cases quite a bit, and that's pointed out here by Windhorst. It talks a little bit about one of the old limited partners, Meyer Orbach, said that he wasn't given his opportunity to sell his 17% stake in the team before the completion of the sale to Lowry Rodriguez. But it turns out Glenn Taylor's agreement protected him, and that suit was tossed from federal court. And then also, by the way, he has a note in here that in the Sportico interview that Mark Lowry did, Mark Lowry said he's never been sued or sued anyone himself, which I guess is good from a business perspective, because it's like, oh, okay, he's a good, his word is his bond sort of a thing, right? Like, I don't know, that's what that tells me, and I'm sure that's what he's trying to get at. But the point Windhorst is trying to make here is Glenn Taylor does the lawsuit stuff well, like, or at least he does it frequently, and therefore may have an advantage there. He then goes on to talk a little bit about the financial situation, which of course we'll talk more on the show later. And I don't want to get into as much now. He finishes with the question, will the Wolves stay in Minnesota? He answers it by saying most likely. Taylor has made it clear over and over he will not allow the team to be sold to owners who plan to move. he's turned down numerous offers to sell to buyers who would pay a premium to do so. And that's part of the reason he sold to Lorian Rodriguez, who at the $1.5 billion valuation, this team's worth at least twice that now. And even then was worth probably over $2 billion, right? A couple years ago. And the $1.5 billion valuation is a bit of a discount because they promised they wouldn't move the team. And that was important to Glenn Taylor. So we'll see. There's also Windhorst mentions the lease to play at Target Center for another 11 years through the 2034-35 season. But to break the lease is only $50 million, which is not a whole lot of money when you're talking about owners. And then also there'd have to be a ton of owners that approve relocation. The NBA doesn't want relocation. So that would be my take on this. He doesn't explicitly say that, but like they're going to add a team in Vegas. They're going to add a team, probably Seattle, right? There's going to be 2 more teams added. And relocation isn't a good look. The last time it's happened was OKC in 2008. Seattle still doesn't have a team back. Seattle's a big market. Minneapolis is actually, in terms of NBA markets, like in the upper tier, right? It's around the same size market as Denver. It's not a small market, and the NBA doesn't want to move a team for all of the reasons. There's so many reasons. So I'm not overly concerned about that. Now, Glenn Taylor, I mean, we'll see. But I will see how it shakes out this summer. But I don't think he's about to sell the team to owners that would even consider moving them at all. All right, let's shift gears here and get into the Wolves' overall standing in the league right now. Minnesota is second in net rating, and they've kind of been headed in that direction. OKC's hit a little bit of a rough patch here, which was bound to happen eventually. Minnesota's now second. You know, Boston's clearing away the best team in the league. They have a net rating at cleaning the glass of 11.7, which again, cleaning the glass takes out garbage time and heaves at the end of quarters. 11.7, which is 3.6 points better than Minnesota, which is crazy. The Wolves are second, though, and they're a full 0.9 points better than OKC, who are a full 1.8 points better than Denver. So the Wolves have a gap of almost 3 points in differential or net rating, however you want to, I guess a little different. But the Wolves are second, Denver's fourth. And then there's New Orleans, by the way, up to sixth. And New Orleans just beat the Suns here recently. We'll talk a little bit about the Suns here in a moment. But the Western Conference right now is, I mean, it's been a battle all year, but like we're going back and forth with these top 3 seeds. The Wolves, of course, all 3 have clinched playoff spots. The Wolves are now a half game up on Denver, plus they have the tiebreaker over Denver. So in reality, they're a full game up over Denver, and they are 1 full game in the standings up on OKC. And at the moment, they still have the tiebreaker over OKC, although that one's close. Remember, they split the season series. The second tiebreaker is division record. That could still change. The Wolves are 12-3 in the division. The Thunder is 12-4. And I believe, I'm going to verify this real quick. I believe the Wolves just have that 1 game against Denver as their only, well, actually, no, then the worst that they could do. Yeah, okay, that's right. It is. So their last division game is against the Nuggets on a back-to-back. But even if the Wolves lose to the Nuggets, they would still have a better conference record than OKC, which is the third tiebreaker. So the Wolves should get the number 1 seed if all 3 teams are tied. My understanding is they win all the tiebreakers. So they have a half-game lead plus the tiebreaker over Denver, a full-game lead plus the tiebreaker over OKC. So they're in pretty good shape. They've also got a better point differential and net rating than both of those teams. And by the way, the Western Conference development from Thursday I mentioned earlier was that the Nuggets lost to the Clippers on Thursday night, and that's huge, right? LA is pretty well, I don't want to say cemented, but they're going to likely be in the 4 seed. They've got a 2-game lead on Denver for the 4 seed, but they're 4 back of OKC, so they're not catching OKC at this point. But the Clippers aren't going anywhere. The Clippers and Suns kind of hovering in the middle of the Western Conference is scary. The Pelicans scare me even more. They're actually tied with the Suns right now for 6th, so we'll talk a little bit more about that and what the Suns have been up to lately here in a minute. I also wanted to mention the NBA power rankings over ESPN. ESPN still has Denver second in their rankings because, of course, they do, and they've got OKC third. The Wolves are 4th. And it's fair to like also factor in the Karl-Anthony Towns injury, right? Now they've been 9-4 since Cat went out, which is a little better or a little slightly worse than their overall winning percentage for the season. But the defense has been awesome, and Ant's been good, and Nas has stepped up huge when he's gotten into the starting lineup recently. So, you know, I get why they're 4th in these power rankings, but right now it'd be hard to argue the Wolves aren't the second best team in the league. And I would consider what they've done without Karl-Anthony Towns is even a greater reason for them to be a little bit higher, even if their ceiling may be lower when Karl-Anthony Towns is not on the floor, which is certainly the case. All right. Let's close here by looking at the matchup against the Suns. As I mentioned earlier, Minnesota has not seen Phoenix since November 15th. That is nearly 4 months ago, which is crazy. And now they play them twice in the last, 8 games of the season. So we'll talk all about that matchup here next and why I really don't like the matchup for Minnesota. We'll cover that here at the close of the show. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is sponsored by our friends at Amazon Fire TV. I've got a couple of Amazon Fire TVs. I have an actual TV with the interface. I've also got an Amazon Fire TV stick in a TV with a different interface because I prefer Amazon Fire TV. Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, plus the Fire TV stick you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, plus free and live TV, whether it's opening weekend for baseball, which is in the books now, but this is the Twins just had their home opener yesterday, or the college basketball tournament, big games this weekend. You're going to want to have a Fire TV. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. That includes all of us at Locked On, plus most of the big pro leagues and college conferences too. Fire TV channels lets you dive into all of the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep up to date on the latest in the world of sports, March Madness, NBA, MLB, and so much more. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, cooking videos, and more. Check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels yet, you should. Trust me. To learn more, visit Amazon.com/Amazon Fire TV. Locked On Fire TV. I'll repeat that for you. To learn more, visit Amazon.com/Locked On Fire TV. Again, that's Amazon.com/Locked On Fire TV. Today's episode is also brought to us by our friends over at Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure might be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. Class-exclusive Google built-in is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. Nissan's incredible lineup also includes the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder, has room for up to 8, an expansive cargo capacity, and advanced available 4x4 capability. With 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds towing, when adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or the Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. All right, so this Wolves-Suns matchup, as I mentioned a couple of times, it's been a minute since we've seen the Phoenix Suns. Remember, way back to November, the Wolves were on a road trip. I think they played the Clippers first. Actually, hang on. I've got it here. I think the Wolves played the Clippers first. This was the second night of a back-to-back. Phoenix hadn't played in 3 days, and this was basically a schedule loss for Minnesota at the time. And I said it at the time, they were in Golden State. It was coming off those consecutive wins in Golden State. So remember, the Wolves started the year 1-2. Then they beat Denver, which kicks off a 7-game winning streak, including 2 games in Golden State, one of those being the Gobert Draymond Green game. So they're 8-2, coming off of these emotional wins, consecutive wins at the Warriors, which at the time, seemed even more impressive because, Golden State is Golden State. And they had the overtime win against Boston mixed in there and everything. And then on the second night of a back-to-back, they go to Phoenix and get absolutely dominated by Phoenix, who's well-rested. The Wolves are on the road, on a back-to-back, etc. And it was ugly. It was. And it wasn't a close game at any point. Phoenix was up 6 at the end of the first quarter. I think this was a national TV game too. And then Phoenix outscored Minnesota 41-25 in the second quarter. This was a regular, no overtime needed, right? This is a blowout. Phoenix hung 133 points on the Wolves, and I should have actually looked this up earlier, but I bet that's the most points they've given up in a game all season long. I'm going to quick scroll through the Wolves schedule game log right here. 129 in an overtime loss to Chicago. Yeah, they have not given up anywhere near that amount of points this year. I mean, 127 in a overtime loss to Boston. They haven't given up. They gave up 129 to OKC in that game the day after Christmas. That's the closest. So 129 to OKC. This was the most points they've given up all season. 133 to Phoenix back on November 15th, and 41 points in the second quarter. In that game, they did not have Bradley Beal. He was still out, and this was the first game Devin Booker had played after returning from, I forget what injury it was at the time, but Devin Booker played and tied with Durant to lead the team with 31 points. He had 31 and 22 shots. Durant was awesome. He had 31 on just 15 shots, had 6 rebounds and 6 assists, and of course has also been just really good overall this year. Bradley Beal's been their leading scorer for the most part, and I shouldn't say for the most part. I'm pretty sure he just straight up leads them in scoring, but he tends to be their nightly leader in scoring. It's close though for the season. Booker's 27.6 per game. Durant's 27.5. Of course, Durant is a little bit more efficient. Booker has those big volume nights where he just gets hot and goes crazy, but Durant remains an ultra efficient offensive player. And, Bradley Beal, for the most part, has been, what the Suns need him to be, which is essentially a third scorer. He is shooting a shade under 39% from three. He's not nearly as efficient as the other two overall. But like, and I mean, by that, I mean, he doesn't shoot the three as well as Durant. He doesn't get to the line as often as either one of them. And that's kind of the separator for Booker in terms of offensively and how he averages more than 10 points more per game. But anyway, back to the first matchup between the two teams. It was really Durant and Booker going off, and the Wolves, just like Anthony Edwards had an off night. He shot 4 of 16 from the field. Cat was fine. He had 25 and 7 in this game, but nobody else came to play. Gobert had just 4 points in 25 minutes. I mean, the Wolves kind of mailed it in. They were down what, 24 at halftime, and they were down 30 going to the fourth quarter. So it was a lot of garbage time. There was a lot of Shake Milton, who, by the way, probably one of the better games he scored in a Wolves uniform, 8 points and 4 rebounds in this game. A lot of Shake Milton late, a lot of slow-mo in the second half, a lot of Nas, who was kind of not in the fringes of the rotation, but playing a little bit less at the time. So this was a schedule loss, but at the same time, I don't love the matchup for Minnesota, period. And I said that at the time, I say it now. I said it last year when the Wolves struggled with Phoenix. The biggest problem is that Minnesota, for the most part, defensively, is happy to give up mid-range jumpers. And against probably maybe not 29 teams, but greater than 25 teams in the league, that's a great strategy. Like, please do that. Make them shoot mid-range jumpers all day. But for Phoenix, that's what they want to do anyway, and they're really good at it. Like, really, really good at it. So they're number 1 in the league in they're number 2 in the league in all mid-range shots, behind only Miami. But they're number 1 in long mid-range shots. Miami shoots a ton of short mid-range. So defined by cleaning the glass, that's between 4 and 14 feet. Phoenix shoots more shots from between 14 feet and the three-point line than any other team in the league. Almost 13% of their shots come from the long mid-range. So overall mid-range shots, which is between 4, which it's all 2-pointers that aren't at the rim. Okay, so anywhere from 4 feet, so outside the restricted area, all the way out to the three-point line. They're number 2 in the league in non-restricted area 2-point attempts. 35% of their shots come from the non-rim 2-point category, which is crazy. Okay, that's the frequency. You want to talk about the accuracy? They're also number 2 in the league. They're number 2 in long mid-range jumpers. They shoot them at 48.1%, and that's what the Wolves defense is generally designed to do. Now, they've been more flexible with their defense as the season has gone on, and they did the same thing the last 2 years under Chris Finch, which was, you have a base defense. So it used to be an aggressive blitzing the pick and roll defense on the perimeter a couple of years ago. And then with Rudy Gobert, it transitioned into more of a drop defense. But lately, they've been doing a little more switching, mixing in some zone here and there. They've just been they've been open to doing more things. They've even done some blitzing with Gobert. Or they do it with Gobert, but they do it more when Karl-Anthony Towns was on the floor and Gobert was off the floor. They'll blitz on the perimeter sometimes. So it's a defense that has a variety of things they can go to, but their preferred defense is still having Gobert and drop. And you can't really do that against Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, and Devin Booker, because they want to shoot long mid-range jumpers, and they're really, really freaking good at it. Phoenix shoots 48% on long mid-range jumpers, which if you're going to shoot that well, it's not a terrible shot. League average is about 42% from long mid-range. The Wolves, for context, who don't shoot a lot of long mid-range, are only 38%, which is below league average from long mid-range jumpers. And again, those three that I mentioned, the 3-star guards for them, are the guys who are, not only happy to shoot them, but prolific at shooting them. Jumping over to Basketball Reference, they sort it a little bit differently, including the glass. But Kevin Durant on 16 plus foot 2-point shots, so greater than 16 feet, but within the arc, 54%. That's crazy. Devin Booker's 48%. Bradley Beal's a shade over 40%. But Bradley Beal also shoots them less frequently. Both Booker and Durant, around 16% of their shots are those long twos. Durant, 28% of his shots are between 10 and 16 feet. Booker doesn't shoot the ball. Well, actually, no, he's still 23% of his shots from there. Beal is obviously more 3-point heavy. That's more of his game. But when Durant or Booker's operate in the middle of the floor, they're more than happy to pull up from anywhere in the mid-range and shoot. And the Wolves are going to have to do some different stuff defensively. Like, obviously, it's going to be a lot of Jaden McDaniels. It's going to be a lot of Nickeil Alexander-Walker, but don't be surprised if the Wolves try some different things defensively. Like a zone's not going to be effective against a team like the Suns, right? Because there's gaps in the middle of the zone, and you're going to give up probably more threes, and the Suns aren't a bad 3-point shooting team either. In terms of frequency, they're kind of middle of the pack. They're 21st in 3-point rate and 5th in percentage. So they shoot a little bit worse and a little bit less frequently than the Wolves from 3, but it's similar. So you're not going to play a zone against Phoenix. I'll be curious to see what Finch does. I think it'll be, their traditional drop, but they'll mix in some switching and stuff depending on the situation. And that's probably the right thing to do against a team like this, who doesn't also, by the way, getting back to shot type frequency, we talk about getting to the rim. Phoenix doesn't do that very often, right? Because those guys are, at least in the case of Durant, I mean, they're getting older, right? They don't necessarily want or need to get all the way to the rim. There isn't a whole lot of big man depth for Phoenix either. So for the Wolves, hey, I mean, you're not really worried about, Jusuf Nurkic is good and has always played well against the Wolves, but you're not super worried about Nurkic going off in the paint. I mean, they had a 21-point win over Cleveland last time out on Wednesday night, and Nurkic had 2 points. He also had 10 rebounds, but he had 2 points on 0 of 4 against Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley, and a really good interior defense for Cleveland. And again, Phoenix won the game by 20 plus because Devin Booker had 40 and Kevin Durant had 32. But you're not super concerned about Nurkic and literally nobody else. The only other rotation big is Drew Eubanks. There's nobody else that's a true rotation big for Phoenix. They have Royce O'Neal effectively playing the 4, and he's a good player and fits well for that team. But there just isn't big man depth. And by the way, speaking of depth, there's no depth to this Phoenix team. Remember, Josh Okogie was starting earlier this year. He's out of the rotation. It's basically Eric Gordon is kind of their bench punch that they, the guy that gives them punch off the bench. Bol is a rotation guy for them now. He had a big game against Cleveland, but you're not expecting, he had 15 points in 22 minutes in that game, but that's not something you're expecting to get out of Bol with frequency. Grayson Allen's a good player. He didn't play against Cleveland, but he's probable against the Wolves. So, it's not a super deep team. It's not a consistent team. They've had a couple of long winning streaks, but beyond that, Phoenix has been, win 2, lose 1, win 3, lose 2, win 2, lose. That's just kind of what they've been doing for most of the season. They had a long winning streak back, actually started when they beat the Wolves in November, and then another 7-game winning streak in January. Since then, they haven't won more than 3 games in a row, and they've only done that twice. So they're up and down quite a bit. We talked about the standings. They're currently tied for the 6th seed. So, I mean, they're trying to stay out of the play-in. And they just saw New Orleans before Cleveland and beat New Orleans by 13, which helps them. Let me look at their tiebreaker real quick with New Orleans and see who wins that. They've still got a game to play, but the Suns have already won 2. So Phoenix does have the tiebreaker over New Orleans. So if they finish with the same record, New Orleans is in the play-in. For the record, I think I'd still rather the Wolves play the Suns than the Pelicans. I know Kevin Durant. I know the mid-range jumper thing, but the Pelicans are scary to me. And the Wolves dominated the Pelicans, saying Zion earlier. But if Zion's on the floor, that's a scary matchup for in my mind for the Wolves. So anyway, I don't like that either of those matchups, the Suns or the Pelicans. And right now, it's not unlikely the Wolves wouldn't face one of those teams in the first round of the playoffs. Anyway, Wolves-Suns matchup. Phoenix, by the way, is favored by 4.5 points on FanDuel. And certainly with no Karl-Anthony Towns and on the road, I guess I get that. it just still seemed a little bit high. I thought it would be more like 2 points. I think it opened at 2.5 and it moved toward Phoenix. And I don't know that we could really pull a whole lot from that game, way back in November. All right. That's all we have for you today here on the show. Enjoy Wolves Suns tonight. Of course, if you can't watch, listen on the SiriusXM SXM app to Alan Horton calling Wolves Suns, and then tune into the postcast of the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel after the game. If you can't watch it live, you can also watch it after the fact or listen here on this audio feed later on Friday or over your weekend. Of course, we'll have a show on Monday, the post-game pod. There'll also be a postcast after the Wolves game on Sunday against, let's see, who do they have Sunday? That's at the Lakers on Sunday night. So we'll have a post-game pod for Monday. We'll also have the live postcast following that game too. All right, that's all we have for you today here on the show. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also watch on YouTube or on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku or Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves are part of the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.